Good morning. Let's get spiritual. What an honor it is to be able to serve in the ministry here that was initiated so long ago by our founding co-ministers, Kirk and Sandy, to be able to be part of serving the InSpirit community, which is just so magical in coming together in service and celebration and learning and music and in so many ways. And it makes it a special delight, and then made it a challenge, because I came to this talk title. There was something that happened, and on, I think it was public radio, they said something about Olivia Newton-John, and then I was thinking, let's get physical. I remembered that. And then the next thing that jumped into my mind, I don't know where, it was somewhere inside of me, was let's get spiritual. And then I was saying, let me hear your spirit talk. And I was wondering, where would I go with that? Because as much as I cherish being able to serve in ministry in this community, I feel that in the year 2018, living together on this planet Earth together as part of human civilization, getting spiritual can be tough. Can be tough because there's distractions. And I was wondering, what could I share, what could I say that might bring some useful focus to that challenge of what do we do to get spiritual? What is that like? So I started by going back and taking a peek in the Science of Mind textbook, and I didn't bring the textbook. I'm just going to read a few sentences, not a lot. And I took a peek into my favorite reference Bible, which I found has a little bit different language than some of the others, but I found a few things that kind of set a backdrop for thinking about the challenge in the modern era with all the media and the everything of what it takes to get spiritual. At the end, I was kind of enthusiastic, but your mileage may vary. Let's see how it works here. So what does Ernest Holmes say? Speaking of the physical, the intellectual, and the spiritual, topics that you could sign up for any of the Science of Mind classes here and learn quite a lot about, read the masters and talk with the teachers, whether it's Kirk, Sandy, Roger, the practitioners. What does Ernest say? We live on three planes at the same time. To attempt to desert any one of these to the cost of the others is abnormal. To live only on the physical plane is to become a brute. To live on the intellectual plane alone might produce a learned and a scientific man, but he would lack true perception. To live only on the spiritual plane might cause one to become a dreamer without any practical way of making his dreams come true. So what I would say to those of you who are here, to our streaming members, I think Ernest has done a masterful job of laying out the challenge and how imbalance can create distortion. And I think it's unfortunately all too easy to look out into the world at what comes to us through news and media and see people that are doing things, and also to see the way that distortion can creep in and trip up the very best efforts. Whether people have good intentions and they're tripped up, or whether they have bad intentions and they're tripped up. This multifold nature of the being, the human, and needing to get into balance in order to be effective in bringing forth results personally and in community is a subtle challenge. And I looked over to see whether the Bible foreshadowed any of what Ernest had to say. As often happens, it does. So we go to 1 Corinthians 15. Just a few sentences here. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being, the last Adam, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural, and after that, the spiritual. So a little bit more concise and focused, but you can understand, I think, how even back in that much earlier era, the author of 1 Corinthians, or authors, however that came about, had their hands on this. And actually it quite a bit aligns, I'll tell you this without dragging you through Holmes Institute, it aligns with the work of the philosophers and this notion that as there is substance, there is spirit. And even the philosophy professors that teach at Holmes Institute go to great lengths to speak articulately about the notion of consciousness and spirit in all things. So then I was wondering, how do I take that and come up with some kind of relevant example? And I was thinking about the last time I spoke, when I was pulled back to my love for science, and it was the anniversary of that science guy, Richard Feynman, and I said some things about that, and I figured, well, I'll go a different way this time. You know, we used to go to what was it called? The first place I went to with Reverend Peggy Bassett was Huntington Beach Church of Religious Science. In the modern day, as society has grown up and evolved, we call ourselves Centers for Spiritual Living, which I think is a growth, a maturity, and a focus that really suits the needs of the evolving world. But you know, back in my time, that science thing got me because science was the first thing I think I was ever competent at as a kid. And then baseball and it came later. I did it in the reverse order. So I was thinking about that and I wanted to go somewhere different, and I went looking out on the internet. And then I saw that, golly gosh, last month, Professor Stephen Hawking passed away. I don't want to do that. But I couldn't resist it because I was thinking he's passed away, and in another few months it's going to be way old news. And there were some things he said that kind of spoke to me about humankind, the experience of life. And also I found that I thought he was spiritual. A little bit more about Professor Hawking. He was in a movie that talked about his life, the guy that got sick and lived in a wheelchair, and some people saw that in the world of science, profoundly impactful in his role there. It turned out, a little point of curiosity, that the disease that afflicted him in his 20s, just a second, let me get this right. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, strikes 2 in 100,000 people. It took our beloved Reverend Peggy Bassett. Typical duration of life after onset, just a couple of years. And it's a horrific, harsh disease that hasn't been solved. And this was the same disease that hit Stephen Hawking as he was getting into the pivotal time in his scientific career where he would complete his PhD and launch towards the professorship or make whatever other choices. And only a few percent of the people, live beyond even 5 years. And here he is, he passed away in March, living with ALS for 55 years. 55 years. And in the end, he was still prolific. Even though he couldn't speak, they had some machinery with a computer, and with painstaking effort, he could communicate a sentence, write a book, do a paper, solve problems that other scientists couldn't even begin to start on. Sometimes I wondered if it was the tragedy of his disease and those limitations that enabled him to have the stupendous focus to solve some of the greatest puzzles of science. Be that as it may. He was also a fellow with an incredible wit, and before I share some comments from Professor Hawking that I think have everything to do with how we can get spiritual, I would just share a little bit of his wit. They asked him, what's the impact of being famous? And he said, for me, he felt the impact of being famous was really tough because he could not get away with putting on a wig and sunglasses. The wheelchair gave him away. He could not just sneak around. And he would actually travel out. He appreciated people. And he would come out to Southern California annually, and he'd speak in public and be accessible to scientists and so forth. So this fellow, Hawking, was absolutely an atheist. No bones about it. His opinion was that people were like some kind of machine, and at the end of life, the machine stops, and you arrange for disposal. That was truly how he felt about this. On the other hand, I think he might have been incredibly spiritual Maybe so. I went to the New York Times and they pulled out quotes of Professor Hawking because over time he said the most amazing things. Most amazing. Well, I think they were amazing. Mileage may vary. Think about how this resonates with you. They asked about, his life and the way he went on and persevered, and like when he had his last professional job, like he was the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at the University of Cambridge. Well, some obscure academic title for sure. That was the same job that Sir Isaac Newton had when he saw an apple fall and figured out why we stick to the ground and don't all drift away into outer space. So a fellow with that disease occupied perhaps the most prestigious job of its kind in the whole academic world. Kind of incredible. But then what did he say about why he persevered and did all of this? I want to show that people need not be limited by physical handicaps as long as they are not disabled in spirit. Now, what spirit was he talking about? I look at that and I sense the spirit of Stephen Hawking. I look at any of us who do something in spite of a handicap or a challenge or a setback, and I would say that if we're not disabled in spirit, we can move forward. And I would suggest to you that that spirit is no different than the Spirit. We're spiritual beings, friends, having this human experience. I don't think it's little bitty spirits running around. I believe it's one spirit. That's my sense of it. And if we're not disabled in spirit, you might translate that, not disconnected from spirit. I think it's possible for people to layer up and get calloused and get separated from spirit. And when you look at some of the great tragedies, some of the places where there's stuff like war going on, I think that people get separated from spirit, and it leads them to actions and decisions that are not the actions and decisions of a spiritual being having a human experience. So when you go back to Hawking and his comment about, he could have had an easier life and not put himself through all that stress. He was a professor. He wrote papers. He had a family. He left behind children, for gosh sakes, afflicted with ALS and bound to a wheelchair. He wanted people to know that you can be beyond any limitation if you're not disabled in spirit. And just think about, is it possibly so that the spirit that this atheist science professor Hawking is talking about is the same spirit that we all celebrate, that brings us together as a spiritual community? I think maybe so. I think maybe so. Another comment he made that I believe is profound, because sometimes we might get obsessed. I don't know if any of you have ever done it, like, do I have some imperfection? Did I get the tie straight? Did I make a neat knot? Is my shoe shine? Did I get the dog hair off of my pant leg? There's various ways we might obsess about that. But then you listen to something that Professor Hawking said one time. Without imperfection, you or I would not exist. And then just pause and wonder, where did that come from? I think maybe what he was saying is that without imperfection, the universe would be like a diamond, a crystal. It would just be in place, in balance, perfect, nothing happening. However, because we're in this world where there are imperfections, issues, gaps, injustices, and imbalances, we show up as spiritual beings having the human experience that puts us on the course to speak to those imbalances, to speak to those injustices, to have the power to take action in the face of imperfection. And I look at that, and I think about all the ministries we have at InSpirit CSL. I look at ministries like the one that Janine has in Africa. We have ministries as we go about addressing that call to speak to the imperfections, because it's part of that whole spiritual gig that we're here on, getting spiritual. I do believe so. I believe so. But again, just because I say so, don't Don't grab onto it. Think about it, challenge it, question it. So there's another thing that Hawking spoke about where he was, according to the opinions of the people that extracted the comments, I didn't have access to the interviews, I don't have all the details, but he was kind of talking about when people face challenges, even depression or discouragement. He was talking about black holes. Maybe you've ever heard about a black hole, or you've watched a science fiction movie where the black hole gobbled up a spaceship, and then it gobbled up a planet, and then it gobbled up a galaxy, and then whoop, it gobbled up a universe, gone. I mean, that's kind of the fantasy stuff. But what is someone like Hawking, who was a specialist in black holes, and he had authority to speak about this, acknowledged by all the scientists of the world as one of the best. He said they're named black holes, his opinion, because they're related to human fears of being destroyed or gobbled up. I don't have fears of being thrown into them. I understand them. I feel in a sense that I am their master. So here he was in his wheelchair, stricken with ALS, in his early 20s, given a prognosis of 2-3 years of life. And he worked on into his 40s and his 50s and his 60s and beyond with that prognosis, not afraid of falling into that black hole, not afraid. I think someone needs to be spiritual to have that posture relative to the black hole. Not religious, that's fine, but spiritual. So then he goes further. Black holes aren't as black as they are painted. They are not the eternal prisons they were once thought. Things can get out of a black hole on the outside and possibly to another universe. So if you feel you are in a black hole, do not give up. There's a way out. So personally, I have a tough time reconciling his notion that people are machines and then you have to have disposal when they stop, and yet he imagines being in a black hole and there's a way out, even to another universe. So I get some spirituality in what he says and how he talks. That's how it lands for me. And then there's one other comment he made that is probably the subject for a class, or maybe it's a talk another day, I don't know, but that'll be next year or something, not the next time I speak. But talking about humans, and what he says about humans, and I would urge you to just listen to this very, very closely and chew on it a bit if it doesn't settle the first time as I share it with you. Speaking about humans, what's Hawking's perspective from his wheelchair? We are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet of a very average star. But we can understand the universe, and that makes us something very special. And I would say this to you, friends. Understanding the universe does not mean you need to absorb the mentality of a Hawking or a Feynman. All you got to do is be able to look out and notice what's beautiful, and by me, you've understood the universe. If you can imagine what you can do to bring something out of balance into balance, the way you can participate in your family, in a relationship, or in the community, in a ministry that brings light and hope, that is understanding the universe. It's not in a book, it's not in a formula, it's in the heart. And it's in the ability to perceive what's spiritual and just act from it in a simple way. If you can do that, you can understand the universe. And indeed, that's what makes us all so very special. There's one other charge that Hawking gave to us about the meaning of life. And after that, I'll close with a quick little responsive exercise you can do with someone sitting near you. What Hawking said was, remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious And however difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. For 5 decades solving the riddles of science, from a wheelchair, he gives us that charge. So now what I'd like us to do is just quickly share a responsive exercise. This will take somebody to be an A and go first, somebody to be a B and go second. Look around you. You know, you can pick an A and a B. You can have multiple A's and multiple B's. And what we'll do is we're going to have the A say to the B, I greet you as a spiritual being and celebrate your radiant beauty. So the A's to the B's with me. I greet you as a spiritual being and celebrate your radiant beauty. And now if there's anyone nearby, just turn back and say it back to them with me. I greet you as a spiritual being and celebrate your radiant beauty. Because if we can do that, if we can be open and perceive beauty, we can explain and understand the universe. And that's why it's just such a delight for me to be here with you when we all get spiritual. And so it is.